Okay, my name is Lindsey Jasperse, and today I'll be talking to you about opportunities for San Diego climate resilience through advancing local agriculture. So at the age of 4, I became a vegetarian, a lover of all vegetables, and an advocate for any activity that involves soil. Since then, not much has changed. However, these interests have evolved a bit. I've become really passionate about food systems and protecting our natural spaces for the way that they can really bring together and strengthen a community. While it's known that agriculture can really play a role in contributing to climate change, it's time that we start rethinking about the way that it can actually contribute to climate adaptation. In the past year, I was working for the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes, where I helped to monitor the impacts and dynamics of California's extreme precipitation events. This involved implementing different weather and soil monitoring systems on different farms and ranches and open spaces in Northern California. And this kind of got me interested in how agriculture in California really is exposed to these inherent challenges because of the variability of the climate. So that's what got me kind of interested in this project. And my project aims to look at how we can instead leverage these agricultural systems as a form of climate adaptation, and how we can transform the way that we use our land to enhance local climate resilience and ensure that these benefits from these lands are sustained well into the future. And then how can we support farmers in keeping this legacy of San Diego agriculture? So first of all, why San Diego? San Diego is a region of diverse human, natural, and working landscapes. And while it's known for its 70 miles of historic coastline, it's home to some of the most abundant natural lands, with some of the most biologically diverse ecosystems in the world. In addition, it has a really unique agricultural sector with the largest number of small farms than any other county in the US. In addition, San Diego has a really unique Mediterranean climate with subtropical and mid-latitude influences. These influences act to create the high degree of precipitation variability that the region experiences. In addition, the region has really diverse topography, and this creates many microclimates that also affect the weather and climate. So these diverse and distinct features of San Diego make it especially vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And some of the major impacts I'll be focusing on today are changes in water quality, quantity, and availability over time. And as a sector that's highly dependent on climate, water resources, and environmental conditions, the agricultural community in San Diego is faced with many challenges in the years to come. However, San Diego's really unique agricultural landscape presents an opportunity to mitigate these challenges and implement strategic adaptation to these challenges. One of the major ways we can do this is, although 5% of the unincorporated San Diego County emissions are from agriculture, there's actually an opportunity because agriculture is the one sector with the ability to transform from a net emitter of carbon to a net sink. So as a region that's really faced with these water resource challenges, how can we use our agricultural lands as climate adaptation and mitigation? One of the major ways we can do this is through reinvesting in the health of our soils through climate-smart agriculture. One of the major forms of this is through carbon farming, and carbon farming is basically a fancy word for a set of farming and ranching practices that enhance the amount of carbon held in the soils and reduces the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. There are a lot of different practices that have demonstrated the ability to increase the organic matter in soil, such as compost application, cover cropping, low-till or no-tilling, planned grazing, and permanent crops, and that's common in orchard trees here in San Diego. And while there remain barriers to implementing carbon farming on a larger scale, there's a specific task force in San Diego that's designed to promote and scale out these practices throughout the county. This group is composed of diverse stakeholders representing local independent farmers, industries, producers, scientists, and philanthropic groups. A recent study in the California Fourth Assessment Report utilized downscaled climate modeling to understand how an increase in soil organic matter would change the soil water holding capacity and hydrologic response to climate. And so I was able to actually build directly off of this study, working with Lorraine Flint, who is one of the lead authors of this report, to understand how increases in soil organic matter would then have an impact on San Diego's carbon sequestration potential, agricultural landscape, water resources, and planned land use. So looking across the region's varied biophysical and institutional terrain, my project looked at focusing on where we can direct our carbon farming efforts to the areas with the biggest impact for soil health, water resources, and agricultural benefits. And then how can we use this as a basis for protecting these lands to conserve these agricultural opportunities? So my first step, this is gonna be a very kind of like skimmed over version of what I did, but my first step was applying the model data at a regional scale. This looked at increasing soil organic matter by 3% to look at the hydrologic response. And so adding soil organic matter is used to mimic what would happen if you were to implement a carbon farming practice such as compost application. An example of one of the hydrologic variables that I looked at was climatic water deficit, which can be thought of basically as the evaporative demand that is not met by the amount of water that's in the soil. This map shows the climatic water deficit for San Diego, and we can look at the difference in climatic water deficit under a scenario with increased soil organic matter of 3% compared to the baseline condition of no added soil organic matter. And this is what the map represents, where areas of yellow, green, and blue represent areas where you see the biggest change in climatic water deficit and thus the biggest impact from a carbon farming practice. You can then look at the change in all of the hydrologic variables, sum this up, and create an index that represents the net hydrologic benefit from increasing soil organic matter. This gives you different values, and you can bin them into 3 different categories of benefit level, where yellow areas represent minimum, green is moderate, and then blue is maximum benefit. My next focus was looking at the agricultural landscape in San Diego. So I first had to identify the existing agricultural lands, and this required combining a couple different data sources to get a better estimation of where our existing agricultural lands are. And this is what I found. All of the green areas represent what I found to be existing agricultural land. And then I overlaid this with what areas are actually listed as protected under California Protected Areas database. And then wanting to combine what I knew about the landscape of agricultural lands with the potential hydrologic benefits from increasing soil organic matter, I looked at what specific existing agricultural lands would show a hydrologic benefit if you were to add a carbon farming practice that increased soil organic matter. And these are all of the areas that I found. And as you can see, there are a lot of areas that see moderate to maximum benefit. And then my third kind of analysis was looking at planned land use. So I looked at San Diego planned land use for 2050, and I wanted to understand where these areas that are planned for urban development intersect with our existing agricultural lands to see what existing agricultural lands are then threatened by urban development. So gray represents areas that are designated for urban, commercial, and industrial use by 2050. Beige represents areas that are designated for water and open space use by 2050, and then green areas are the existing agricultural lands that I previously identified. And so by overlaying these existing agricultural lands with areas that are planned for urban development, you get the red areas, and the red areas represent the agricultural lands that are then threatened by future development by 2050. This map shows the hydrologic benefit that is then correlated with the red areas that are threatened by development. And thus, these are the potential benefits that would be lost if these lands are in fact developed by 2050. My last step was looking at what portion of the threatened agricultural lands are actually listed as protected. So what did I find? I found that San Diego has a total hydrologic benefit area of 590,500 acres, with 86% of benefits within the unincorporated county. I found that San Diego also has 452,000 acres of existing agricultural lands, and 28% of these lands are listed as protected. Within the existing agricultural lands, 238,500 acres show potential benefit from increasing soil organic matter through a carbon farming practice. I found that of our existing agricultural lands, 220,610 acres are planned for urban use by 2050. which corresponds to a lost potential hydrologic benefit of 145,000 acres, and this represents 65% of the total potential hydrologic benefits from increasing soil organic matter on working lands. And of these agricultural lands that are threatened by future development, 13% are listed as protected. So what do these results tell us? Looking at these maps, we can see that there are several areas within the county that show potential hydrologic benefit from increasing soil organic matter through strategic soil management practices. You can also translate these kind of benefits into more tangible impacts for the farming community. For instance, decreases in water deficit can represent reduced vegetation stress and irrigation and water needs. Increased productivity can enhance crop yields and forage production. And so combined, you can see that increasing soil organic matter can really help buffer the impacts of climate change, specifically droughts and extreme precipitation events that the region is prone to, in comparison to a no-action soil management. By combining agricultural analyses with hydrologic analyses, we can identify existing opportunities to be implementing these practices for climate resiliency. In addition, it can help inform future efforts by entities like the task force in implementing these kind of projects. And then almost most importantly is that you can see that there are several opportunities for conservation of these agricultural lands. Because carbon sequestration promises long-lasting benefits that only increase over time, it's important that if we're going to be directing our efforts to these areas, that these lands are still going to be intact and producing in years to come. So as San Diego faces this demand for development, how it reconciles these pressures with the importance of agricultural lands is a really important component of its climate resiliency. Some final conclusions and recommendations. First of all, there needs to be a better understanding of San Diego's agricultural landscape. There's a lot of data discrepancy that I found in the different sources that I looked at, and not a lot of spatial recognition of where existing agricultural lands are. So how are we supposed to implement these projects and direct preservation efforts if we don't know where our existing agricultural lands are? In addition, this study and the California Fourth Assessment Report show the ability of these recent model advancements to translate hydrologic benefits at a fine scale with confidence. Resource managers in the past have relied on pretty coarse scale model resolution and data projections, and so being able to utilize this kind of information can give a better understanding of landscape and hydrologic processes at a local scale. In addition, carbon farming practices look different for each region, so being able to use this as a tool to help farmers implement these projects are really important. And then in addition, we need to be constantly updating, maintaining, and improving these science-based decision support tools if we're going to be using them in future efforts. I want to highlight that this advanced science and climate modeling, plus the economic programs that are being developed, and the political will and support from entities like the Carbon Farming Task Force presents a really opportune time, but a necessary time for on-the-ground implementation of these practices. Lastly, I hope that my project can help tell the story of San Diego's agricultural landscape, the potential for carbon farming in our region, and the value that these lands hold, and really the case for the preservation in the years to come. I've created a story map through Esri ArcGIS online, and I'll be presenting this to the San Diego Food Systems Alliance, the Task Force, and the Climate Science Alliance. My story map can help continue this story, giving a little bit more information on the steps that I went through for my project, more information on the data that I used, and with the ability for viewers to interact with the maps that I made as well. So thank you for listening, and I want to thank everybody who was involved in helping with my project. And I'll take any questions. Yeah.
Can you elaborate on what, how the 13% of the agricultural lands that were given a protected status, how they got to be? Did the owners sign a conservation easement, or is there some other program that?
Yeah, so I can pull up the slide, but the source that I used was California Protected Lands, and it includes both conservation easements and then protected areas based on other protection mechanisms other than easements. And so I combined these to look at the total protected lands. And then if you looked at my story map, you're able to look at what agency specifically is in charge of the easement and then the protection status of it. but it varies from nonprofit to state to city level. So, yeah.
On the, specifically on, did you talk to people in the agricultural industry?
About what part of this?
Well, specifically your soil organic matter. Why don't they use it? It would seem to me it increases productivity, helps
Right.
all the things you mentioned.
Right. Well, there are a lot of barriers. A lot of it is economic incentives. There's not a really well implemented economic program right now for farmers. And so a lot of these practices, while they can promise these results, it is a little bit of experimenting because it is on a case by case basis. And so this extra effort and this extra money going towards implementing these tools can be expensive for farmers at first, so figuring out what works. And so we need to have better economic support systems for farmers if they're going to be taking on these kind of risks initially. But a 3% is very attainable for many areas. So, thank you so much. Oh.